The rising sun painted the weathered buildings of Redemption Springs in shades of amber and gold. Sarah Blackwood stood motionless on her porch, watching the day break over the quiet town that time had all but forgotten. Her slender fingers curled around a steaming mug of coffee, but she barely noticed its warmth. Her eyes, haunted by memories she could never outrun, were fixed on the distant mountains. 5 years had passed since Jack's death. 5 years of silence and solitude punctuated only by the presence of young Eli, the son of her departed friend. The boy who had given her a reason to keep living when grief threatened to swallow her whole. Sarah's cabin stood apart from town, a deliberate distance that reflected the walls she'd built around her heart. Once she had been known throughout the territory as one of the finest shots a woman could be, maybe even better than most men. Now her guns lay buried in a wooden chest beneath her bed, a promise to herself never to embrace violence again, a promise she feared wouldn't last. The morning air carried the scent of pine and dust as Sarah finished her coffee. Her hair, once meticulously styled, now hung in a simple braid down her back. The black of mourning had long since faded from her clothes, replaced by practical denims and cotton, but the shadow of loss still darkened her eyes. "Sarah," Eli's sleepy voice called from inside the cabin. "Is breakfast ready?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Almost, little man. Just watching the sunrise." Eli appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his wild mop of sandy hair sticking up in all directions. At 10 years old, he was all elbows and knees, growing too fast for his clothes. "Can I ride into town with you today?" he asked, hope brightening his face. Sarah nodded, ruffling his hair as she stepped back inside. "We need supplies anyway, and Eleanor asked me to bring by some of that yarrow you helped me gather." As they ate breakfast, Sarah felt a familiar unease settling over her. It had been this way for days now, an inexplicable tension in the air, like the stillness before a storm. She'd lived through enough hardship to recognize the feeling of danger approaching. "Remember what I taught you," she said quietly as they saddled their horses. "If trouble comes, stay low, stay quiet, find cover." Eli recited, his young face suddenly serious. "I remember, Sarah. The ride into Redemption Springs took just under an hour. Once a bustling outpost during the gold rush, the town had dwindled when the mines started to fail. Most of the men had left for richer prospects elsewhere, leaving behind a community largely comprised of women, children, and the elderly. What remained was a single street of weathered buildings, a general store, a small schoolhouse, the sheriff's office, a saloon that doubled as a boarding house, and a white-steepled church at the far end. Clara Livingston's general store served as the heartbeat of the community. As Sarah and Eli tied their horses to the hitching post outside, Clara herself appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sarah Blackwood?" she called, a genuine smile warming her careworn face. "Beginning to think you'd turned hermit for good." Sarah returned the smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just keeping to myself, Clara. You know how it is." Clara nodded, understanding in her gaze. At 40, she had weathered her own storms, losing her husband to pneumonia, 2 winters past raising 3 children alone while running the store. Her strength was quiet but undeniable. "Well, come on in. Got some fresh preserves just put up. And Eli, I believe I might have a stick of whorehound candy with your name on it." The boy's face lit up as he followed Sarah inside. The store smelled of coffee, leather, and dried herbs, a comforting mixture that reminded Sarah of simpler times. As Clara measured out flour and sugar, she leaned in closer. "Sheriff Miller's worried," she murmured. "Ryder came through yesterday with news. Silas Blackwell's gang was spotted near Golden Creek, 3 days' ride from here." Sarah felt her blood run cold at the name. Silas Blackwell, a man whose reputation for cruelty had spread throughout the territory like wildfire. A man who left nothing but death and ashes in his wake. "Has Miller sent for help?" Sarah asked, her voice low so Eli wouldn't hear. Clara shook her head. "Telegraph line's been down for a week. He rode out this morning to the next county. Said he'd be back by sundown." Sarah nodded, her mind already calculating distances, possibilities. "We should be fine. Redemption Springs doesn't have anything worth Blackwell's attention." But even as she spoke the words, she didn't believe them. Towns like theirs were perfect targets, isolated, vulnerable, with minimal resistance. Outside the store, the sound of horses' hooves drew their attention. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her hip, where her gun would have been. but she carried no weapon now. "It's just Rebecca," Clara said, relief evident in her voice. The school teacher rode past her posture, straight as an arrow, despite the dust of the trail. Rebecca Wells had come to Redemption Springs 3 years ago, a Boston-educated woman with ideas bigger than the town could contain. Her schoolhouse might be small, but her impact on the children, especially the girls, was immeasurable. "Miss Rebecca," Eli called, waving enthusiastically. Rebecca reined in her horse, her smile brightening when she saw the boy. "Well, if it isn't my star pupil. Are you keeping up with your reading, Eli?" "Yes, ma'am. Sarah and I just finished Treasure Island last night." "Excellent choice." Rebecca's gaze shifted to Sarah, a question in her eyes. "Mrs. Blackwood, might I have a word when you're finished here?" There was something in Rebecca's tone that put Sarah on alert. "Of course. We'll stop by the schoolhouse before heading home." After finishing their shopping, Sarah and Eli made their way to Eleanor Whitman's small cottage near the church. The older woman was Redemption Springs' closest thing to a doctor, her knowledge of medicinal herbs and practical healing making her invaluable to the community. Eleanor's silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but her eyes twinkled with warmth as she welcomed them. "About time you brought that yarrow. Mrs. Peterson's rheumatism isn't getting any better while we wait." Sarah handed over the bundle of dried plants. "Sorry, Eleanor. Haven't been to that side of the creek lately." The older woman studied Sarah's face, seeing past her composed exterior. "Something's troubling you." It wasn't a question. Eleanor had always been perceptive, too perceptive for Sarah's comfort sometimes. "Just rumors," Sarah replied. "Nothing solid." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Well, my door's always open, for yarrow or for counsel." She turned to Eli with a conspiratorial wink. "And I believe I have some fresh gingerbread that needs eating." While Eli happily accepted Eleanor's offering, Sarah stepped outside, needing a moment alone. The town felt different today, tension hanging in the air like the electrical charge before lightning strikes. She scanned the horizon, half expecting to see a cloud of dust announcing approaching riders. Nothing. Just the endless blue sky and the distant mountains. Yet the unease remained. Their next stop was the schoolhouse, a modest building at the edge of town. Inside, Rebecca was organizing books on a shelf, her movements precise and efficient. She turned as Sarah entered, relief evident in her expression. "Thank you for coming," she said, glancing around to ensure they were alone. "I found something yesterday that, well, I'm not entirely sure what to make of it." She led Sarah to her desk and pulled out an old leather-bound book. "I was reorganizing the town records and found this tucked between the pages of a county ledger." The book fell open to reveal a yellowed map carefully drawn and annotated in faded ink. "It's a map of tunnels," Rebecca explained, her finger tracing the lines. "War tunnels, from the looks of it, built beneath the church and extending throughout the town. I've never heard mention of them." Sarah studied the map, her mind racing. The church was used as a field hospital during the border conflicts. These must have been escape routes. "Or hiding places," Rebecca added. "The entrance appears to be behind the altar." Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. If trouble came, these tunnels could prove invaluable. "Have you told anyone else?" Sarah asked. Rebecca shook her head. "Only you. I thought—" The sound of galloping horses cut her off. Not one or two, but many too many for routine travelers. Sarah moved to the window, her heart hammering against her ribs as she saw a cloud of dust approaching from the east. "Get down!" she ordered, pulling Rebecca away from the window. "Eli, come here." The boy scurried to her side, his eyes wide with fear. "Is it them?" Rebecca whispered. "Blackwell's gang." Sarah nodded grimly. "Looks like at least a dozen riders, moving fast." She turned to Eli, gripping his shoulders. "Remember what I taught you. You need to hide. Now." "But Sarah—" "No arguments." Her voice was firm but gentle. "Under the floorboards like we practiced at home. Don't come out until I call for you. Understand?" The boy nodded, tears welling in his eyes. Rebecca quickly moved a rug aside, revealing a trap door that led to a small storage space beneath the schoolhouse. "In here, Eli. Quickly now." As soon as the boy was safely hidden, Sarah turned to Rebecca. "Get as many people as you can to Eleanor's. Tell her what's happening. She's closest to the church. Maybe you can check if that tunnel entrance is still accessible." "What about you?" Rebecca asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Sarah's gaze hardened. "I'm going to find Sheriff Miller." But she was too late. The thundering of hooves grew louder as Silas Blackwell's gang rode into Redemption Springs like a hurricane of dust and malice. From her position at the edge of town, Sarah watched in horror as they surrounded the sheriff's office. Sheriff Miller had returned early. He stood on the steps, his hand hovering near his gun. "This is a peaceful town," his voice carried across the distance. "We don't want any trouble." A man Sarah assumed was Silas Blackwell laughed, a sound devoid of humor that sent chills down her spine. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a black duster that flapped like crow's wings in the breeze. His face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the glint of his smile. "Trouble's already here, old man," Blackwell replied. "Question is, how much blood gets spilled before you understand that?" Miller stood his ground. "I'm asking you nicely to move on. And I'm telling you this town belongs to me now." Blackwell's voice hardened. "Starting with that badge." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Miller reached for his gun, but Blackwell was faster. The crack of a shot echoed through the street, followed by another and another. Sheriff Miller crumpled to the ground, his body jerking with each impact. Sarah pressed herself against the wall of the nearest building, fighting the urge to run forward. There was nothing she could do, not against so many, not without a weapon. Blackwell dismounted, strolling casually to Miller's body. He knelt down, removed the sheriff's badge, and pinned it to his own coat with a mocking gesture. "Hang him in the square," he ordered his men. "Make sure everyone sees what happens to those who don't understand the new order of things." Two men dragged Miller's body toward the town square, leaving a trail of blood in the dust. Blackwell raised his voice, addressing the town at large. "People of Redemption Springs, your sheriff is dead. Your town belongs to me now. You have 1 week to clear out those who remain. Will serve me or join him." He pointed to Miller's body, now being hoisted up a hastily erected gallows. "Consider this your only warning." Sarah's hands clenched into fists, nails digging into her palms. She'd seen men like Blackwell before, men who mistook cruelty for strength, who built their power on fear and blood. Men who thought they were untouchable. A scream pierced the air, high and terrified. Sarah's gaze snapped to the saloon where one of Blackwell's men was dragging a young girl out onto the porch. Margaret Thompson, the 16-year-old daughter of the saloon owner. "Look what I found hiding upstairs, boss." The man called, one hand gripping Margaret's arm, the other tangled in her long blonde hair. Blackwell approached slowly, studying the girl like a wolf eyeing a rabbit. "Well now, aren't you a pretty little thing?" Margaret struggled against her captor, tears streaming down her face. "Please, I haven't done anything. Bravery won't help you, girl." Blackwell ran a finger down her cheek, making her flinch. "But I admire spirit. She'll do nicely as insurance. Bring her." Sarah watched helpless as Margaret was thrown onto a horse. The girl's eyes, wide with terror, scanned the town, desperately seeking help that didn't come. "Remember," Blackwell called out to the silent buildings, knowing frightened eyes watched from behind curtains and shutters. 1 week, then this town and everything in it belongs to me." With that, the gang rode toward the outskirts of town where the abandoned mining office stood, the perfect vantage point to keep watch over Redemption Springs. As the dust settled, Sarah remained frozen, the weight of what she'd witnessed pressing down on her chest like a stone. Sheriff Miller was dead, Margaret was taken, and a band of killers had just claimed their town. She needed to get back to Eli. They would flee, ride as far and as fast as possible. But even as the thought formed, she knew she couldn't abandon the people of Redemption Springs. Not when Margaret was in danger, not when Blackwell threatened everyone who remained. A movement near the general store caught her eye. Clara emerged cautiously, a rifle clutched in her hands. Their eyes met across the distance, and Sarah saw her own rage and determination reflected back at her. Redemption Springs had just been handed a death sentence. But Sarah Blackwood wasn't ready to surrender, not to Blackwell, and not to the fear that had kept her isolated for 5 long years. She made her way back to the schoolhouse, moving carefully from building to building. When she slipped inside, she found Rebecca waiting anxiously. "I saw," Rebecca whispered, her face pale. "From the window. They killed Sheriff Miller and took Margaret." Sarah nodded grimly. "Where's Eli?" "Still hiding. I didn't want to bring him out until you returned. Sarah crossed to the trap door and opened it gently. Eli, it's me. You can come out now. The boy climbed out immediately, throwing his arms around Sarah's waist. I heard gunshots, he whispered, his voice muffled against her shirt. I know, little man. She stroked his hair, offering what comfort she could. We need to get back to the cabin. It's not safe here. Rebecca caught Sarah's arm. We can't just leave. Not with Margaret. I'm not suggesting we abandon her, Sarah replied, her voice low and fierce. But we need a plan, and I need my guns. The road back to Sarah's cabin stretched longer than ever before each shadow and sound a potential threat. She kept Eli close, one arm around him, as they rode double on her horse, leaving his mount behind for speed. The cabin appeared untouched when they arrived, but Sarah took no chances. She approached cautiously, her senses alert for any sign of intruders. Wait here, she instructed Eli, helping him down from the horse. If anyone comes who isn't me, you run for the creek bed and follow it down to the Peterson farm. Understand? Eli nodded solemnly, his young face set with determination that broke Sarah's heart. No child should have to know such fear. The cabin was empty, just as she'd left it that morning, a lifetime ago it seemed. Sarah moved swiftly to her bedroom and knelt beside the bed. The wooden chest she pulled out was heavy with more than just metal and wood. It carried the weight of her past, of promises made and now about to be broken. The key hung on a chain around her neck, nestled against her skin, like a constant reminder. She unlocked the chest with hands that did not tremble. Inside lay 2 revolvers, meticulously maintained despite years of disuse. Beside them, boxes of ammunition and a gun belt worn smooth with use. Jack's wedding ring rested in a small velvet pouch, the only piece of him returned after the mine collapse that claimed his life. Sarah touched the pouch briefly, a silent apology for what she was about to do, then fastened the gun belt around her waist. The familiar weight of it felt both foreign and like coming home. She loaded both revolvers with practiced efficiency, muscle memory taking over despite the years. When she emerged from the cabin, Eli's eyes widened at the sight of the guns. You said you'd never use those again, he said quietly. Sarah knelt before him, meeting his gaze. Sometimes we have to break promises to keep the ones that matter more. I promise to keep you safe, and I will. But Margaret needs help, too, and the whole town is in danger. The ride back to town was tense with anticipation. Sarah's mind raced with half-formed plans, none of them sufficient against the odds they faced. One woman against Blackwell's entire gang seemed impossible, but perhaps she wouldn't have to stand alone. They reached Eleanor's cottage as dusk was falling. Inside, they found not only Eleanor and Rebecca, but Clara as well, all gathered around the kitchen table in hushed conversation. Their eyes widened at the sight of Sarah's guns, but no one commented on them directly. I sent my children to my sister's farm, Clara said by way of greeting. Told her to keep them there until this is over one way or another. Sarah nodded, appreciating the woman's pragmatism. Rebecca, did you check the church tunnels? Yes, the school teacher replied. The entrance is there behind a false panel in the confessional. The tunnels are intact, though dusty with disuse. That might be our only advantage, Sarah said, spreading out the map Rebecca had found. If Blackwell doesn't know about them, we could move throughout town unseen. Eleanor studied the map, her finger tracing the passages. These branch out further than I realized. There's even one that leads near the old mining office. Where they're holding Margaret, Clara added. Sarah felt a faint stirring of hope. Perhaps they weren't as helpless as she'd feared. We need to gather everyone we can trust, she said. Women who can fight or who are willing to learn. Most of the men left for the new strikes months ago, Clara said. Those who remained are either too old or too young. Then we make do with who we have, Sarah replied firmly. We outnumber them even if they outgun us. Eleanor's weathered face creased with determination. I may be old, but I can still shoot straight. My Henry's rifle is in good condition. I've never fired a gun, Rebecca admitted, but I'm a quick study, and I know this town better than most. Clara nodded. Count me in. I've got a shotgun and know how to use it. Sarah felt a swell of pride at these women's courage. We'll need more than just the 4 of us. Clara, who else can we trust? Ruby at the saloon, Clara suggested after a moment's thought. She's tougher than she looks. And Willow, the half-Apache woman who lives at the edge of town. She keeps to herself, but she's a survivor. Bring them here tomorrow at dawn, Sarah instructed. We have 6 days before Blackwell's deadline. 6 days to prepare. As the others left to rest before the coming storm, Eleanor held Sarah back with a gentle hand on her arm. Jack would be proud, the older woman said softly. He always said you were the strongest person he knew. Sarah's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. I couldn't save him. No, Eleanor agreed gently. But you can save Margaret and this town. That's what matters now. Later that night, after Eli had fallen into an exhausted sleep, Sarah stood on the porch of Eleanor's cottage, her eyes fixed on the distant lights of the mining office where Blackwell and his men had made camp. The weight of her guns at her hips was both reassuring and a reminder of all she had tried to leave behind. A flicker of movement in the shadows caught her attention. Sarah's hand moved to her revolver, but she relaxed slightly when she recognized Willow stepping into the moonlight. The young woman moved with silent grace, her mixed heritage evident in her features. At 25, she had already endured more hardship than most faced in a lifetime. Orphaned young, caught between two worlds that often rejected her, surviving by her wits and her intimate knowledge of the land. Clara said you were gathering fighters? Willow said without preamble, her voice low and melodic. Sarah nodded. We need every hand we can get. Willow's dark eyes assessed Sarah with unnerving directness. I saw what they did to the sheriff. I know what men like that do to women. Then you know what we're facing. A ghost of a smile touched Willow's lips. I know how to make traps that can cripple a horse or a man. I know which plants cause blindness when burned. I know how to move without being seen. Skills we desperately need, Sarah acknowledged. Will you help us? Instead of answering directly, Willow asked, do you really believe we can win against men like that? Sarah considered the question carefully. Lies would serve no purpose here. I believe we have no choice but to try, she finally replied. I believe that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one you've underestimated. And I believe that if we're smart and we work together, we have a chance. Willow studied her for a long moment before nodding once decisively. Then I will fight with you. As Willow melted back into the shadows, Sarah felt the first real stirring of hope. Perhaps they weren't just facing certain death after all. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could turn the tables on Silas Blackwell and his men. The following dawn brought a gathering unlike any Redemption Springs had seen before. In Eleanor's small cottage, 6 women assembled, each different, each carrying her own scars, but united now in common purpose. Sarah looked around at their faces, Eleanor with her quiet wisdom, Rebecca with her keen intelligence, Clara with her steady resolve, Ruby from the saloon, with her sharp wit masking a fighter's heart, and Willow with her silent strength. Together they formed an unlikely army, but perhaps the only hope Redemption Springs had. Blackwell expects us to run or surrender. Sarah began, her voice steady. He doesn't expect resistance, especially not from women. That's our first advantage, surprise. We're still outnumbered, Ruby pointed out, adjusting the lace at her wrist with nervous fingers, and outgunned. Which is why we won't face them directly, Sarah replied. We'll use what they don't know against them. The tunnels, the land. Our knowledge of this town. She spread the map across the table. Rebecca has found old war tunnels beneath the town. They'll allow us to move unseen, to communicate, to strike where they least expect it. A spark of interest lit Rebecca's eyes. Guerrilla tactics rather than direct confrontation. Exactly, Sarah nodded. We can't match their firepower, but we can outsmart them. Over the next hour, they formulated the beginnings of a plan. Willow would set traps around the perimeter of town, focusing on the main approaches. Clara and Eleanor would work on ways to weaken Blackwell's men without direct confrontation, contaminated food supplies, perhaps, or medicinal herbs that would cause illness without raising suspicion. Rebecca would coordinate communications through the tunnel system, ensuring they could move and share information without being detected. Ruby, with her position at the saloon, could gather intelligence men, talked freely around women they considered mere entertainment. And Sarah would focus on locating and rescuing Margaret while preparing the town's defenses for the inevitable confrontation. As they dispersed to begin their preparations, Sarah felt a weight lift slightly from her shoulders. They were no longer helpless victims awaiting Blackwell's return. They were fighters preparing for battle. That afternoon, Sarah ventured closer to the mining office, using the cover of trees and rocks to observe Blackwell's camp. She counted 15 men heavily armed and clearly experienced in violence. Margaret was nowhere in sight, but a smaller building behind the main office showed signs of a guard likely where they were keeping her. As Sarah watched two riders departed from the camp heading toward town, she recognized one as the man who had dragged Margaret from the saloon. Instinct told her to follow to see what mischief they planned. Moving with the stealth Jack had taught her years ago, Sarah made her way back to town ahead of the riders, using shortcuts and game trails. She positioned herself on the roof of the abandoned blacksmith's shop, a vantage point that offered both concealment and a clear view of the main street. The two men rode in leisurely, confident in their dominance. They dismounted outside the general store, laughing and shoving each other like schoolboys anticipating mischief. Clara was inside, having reopened the store as part of their strategy to maintain normalcy. Sarah watched tensely as the men entered, her hand on her revolver. Long minutes passed. Sarah was about to move closer when the men emerged, arms laden with supplies. They hadn't harmed Clara. They were simply taking what they wanted, secure in the knowledge that no one would stop them. As they loaded their ill-gotten goods onto their horses, one man pulled something from his pocket, a small object that glinted in the sunlight. Sarah squinted, trying to make out what it was. A ring. The man was examining a gold ring, holding it up to catch the light before slipping it onto his little finger with a satisfied grin. Something about the gesture sent a chill through Sarah's body. She shifted position slightly, trying to get a better look at the ring. The men mounted their horses and began to ride back toward camp, passing directly below Sarah's hiding place. As they did, the sun caught the ring again, and Sarah's heart stopped. The distinctive pattern etched into the gold was unmistakable. It was Jack's wedding band, the match to the one she still wore on a chain around her neck. The one that should have been buried with him in the mine collapse. Without conscious thought, Sarah's gun was in her hand. She took aim at the rider wearing Jack's ring, her finger tightening on the trigger. A small voice in her mind screamed warnings she would reveal herself, endanger their plans, potentially bring Blackwell's wrath down on the town ahead of schedule. But that ring was Jack's, the ring she had placed on his finger on their wedding day. The ring that should have gone to his grave. The shot echoed across the quiet town like thunder. The rider jerked, clutching his shoulder, and tumbled from his horse. His companion wheeled around, drawing his gun, but Sarah's second shot caught him in the arm, causing him to drop his weapon with a howl of pain. Sarah was down from the roof in seconds, her gun trained on the fallen men. The one wearing Jack's ring was cursing, blood seeping between the fingers pressed to his shoulder. "Where did you get that ring?" Sarah demanded, her voice deadly calm. The man spat at her feet. "Go to hell, bitch!" Sarah pressed the barrel of her revolver against his wounded shoulder, making him cry out in agony. "The ring, now!" "Found it," he gasped. "On a dead man, in the mines." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What mines?" The man's eyes narrowed with sudden understanding. "You're her, the widow, Jack's woman." "Where did you find him?" Sarah pressed harder, beyond caring about the pain she caused. A grotesque smile spread across the man's face despite his pain. "Jack is it. He's working the tunnels if he's still alive. Blackwell's got a dozen men down there digging out what's left of the gold seam. Worked my shift there before joining the road crew." Sarah felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. Jack alive. After all these years, it wasn't possible. "You're lying," she whispered. "Ask your friend Margaret," the man taunted. "She saw them, the mine slaves, right before we took her." A commotion was growing around them. Clara had emerged from the store, shotgun in hand. Willow appeared like a shadow from between buildings. Others were gathering, drawn by the gunshots. "Sarah," Clara called urgently, "we need to get them out of sight, now." Reality crashed back. Sarah hauled the wounded man to his feet, ignoring his cries of pain. "Get up, move!" They dragged the two men to the church, where the tunnel entrance provided the perfect makeshift prison. Rebecca was already there, having heard the shots. "What happened?" she asked, her eyes wide at the sight of the bleeding outlaws. Sarah didn't answer immediately, her mind still reeling from what she'd learned. Jack alive. Working as a slave in mines everyone thought exhausted years ago. "Secure them," she ordered instead. "Make sure they can't escape, but don't let them die. They have information we need." Once the men were locked in a small storage room off the tunnel entrance, Sarah finally stepped outside, needing air that wasn't thick with the scent of blood and fear. Clara followed her. "What were you thinking? You could have been killed and our entire plan exposed." Sarah opened her hand, revealing Jack's ring sitting in her palm. He was wearing this. Clara's anger faded as recognition dawned. Jack's ring. But how? He says Jack is alive. The words felt strange on Sarah's tongue, impossible and wonderful and terrifying all at once. That Blackwell has men working the old mine tunnels as slaves. That Margaret saw them before she was taken. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. My God, if it's true. Then we have even more reason to defeat Blackwell, Sarah finished grimly. And I have even more reason to need those tunnels mapped. If Jack is down there, I'll find him. But first we have to secure the town and rescue Margaret. As they walked back toward Eleanor's cottage, Clara asked quietly, what will you tell Eli about Jack? Sarah's steps faltered. Eli, who had loved Jack like a father. Eli, who had grieved alongside her. Eli, who might now have to face either miraculous reunion or crushing disappointment. Nothing, she decided. Not until I know for certain. Hope can be the cruelest weapon of all. That evening, as the women gathered again to refine their plans, a new determination burned in Sarah's heart. If Jack truly lived, she would find him. If Blackwell held him prisoner, she would free him. And if anyone stood in her way, heaven help them. Redemption Springs had just become the battleground for more than just the town's survival. It had become the stage for Sarah Blackwood's redemption and her reckoning. I've completed part 1 of Redemption Springs, 6,000 words following your outline exactly. The story introduces Sarah Blackwood and establishes the setting of Redemption Springs, a small western town, primarily populated by women after most men left during the gold rush. Dawn broke over Redemption Springs like a fever, hot and relentless. Sarah stood at Eleanor's kitchen window, watching as thin ribbons of light stretched across the deserted main street. 3 days had passed since Sheriff Miller's execution. 4 remained until Blackwell's deadline. The wounded outlaws remained secured in the church tunnels, tended just enough to keep them alive and talking. Their horses had been hidden in the livery stable, their absence from Blackwell's camp a growing concern. He'll send more men to look for them soon, Sarah said, not turning as Eleanor entered the kitchen. We need to accelerate our plans. The older woman nodded, the silver of her hair catching the morning light. The others will be here shortly. Ruby returned from the saloon an hour ago, says Blackwell's men were asking questions last night. A soft shuffling sound announced Eli's presence. The boy had slept fitfully, plagued by nightmares Sarah couldn't shield him from. His eyes, too old for his young face, sought hers. Is it true? He asked quietly. What they're saying about Jack? Sarah's heart clenched. Despite her efforts to keep the revelation and private word had spread among their small group. Of course it had reached Eli. She knelt before him, taking his small hands in hers. I don't know, little man. The man who told me could be lying. But you're going to find out. Not a question, but a statement, his voice steady with a child's simple faith. Yes, Sarah promised. But first we need to make the town safe. We need to rescue Margaret. Eli nodded solemnly. I want to help. You can help by staying safe, Sarah replied firmly. By being Eleanor's messenger through the tunnels. Your job is important, Eli. Without you, our communications fall apart. The boy straightened, pride replacing uncertainty in his eyes. I won't let you down. I know you won't. The sound of approaching footsteps ended their conversation. One by one, the women of Sarah's makeshift army arrived. Clara, with her practical determination, Rebecca with her strategic mind, Ruby with intelligence gleaned from Blackwell's loose-tongued men, and Willow with her silent confidence. They gathered around Eleanor's kitchen table, a war council unlike any the West had seen. Time to make decisions, Sarah began without preamble. We have 4 days until Blackwell expects this town to be his. I say we use that time to make sure it's his grave instead. Ruby raised an eyebrow, adjusting the worn lace at her collar. At 30, she carried herself with the weary dignity of a woman who had survived by trading in men's desires. But beneath her painted smile lay a core of steel. Bold word, she said, but his men outnumber us nearly 3 to 1, and they're killers to a man. Which is why we won't fight them on their terms, Sarah replied. We'll use what they don't expect against them. She looked to Willow. What progress on the traps? The younger woman's eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. I've set spring snares along the northern approaches, hidden in the tall grass where riders won't see them, until too late. Tripwires near the cemetery that will bring a horse down if triggered. Good. Sarah turned to Clara and Eleanor. And the supplies. Clara's smile held no warmth. I've prepared special provisions for our unwelcome guests. Eleanor helped me identify seeds that cause severe digestive distress when ground into flour. Nothing fatal, just enough to keep them occupied with matters other than terrorizing us. I've also prepared a special batch of whiskey, Eleanor added, laced with herbs that will leave them with pounding heads and blurred vision. Ruby has agreed to ensure it reaches Blackwell's camp. Ruby nodded. Their guard, the one watching Margaret, has taken a liking to me. Thinks I'm afraid enough to cooperate for protection. He'll take the whiskey, especially if I deliver it personally. Sarah considered this new information. Can you get close enough to assess Margaret's condition to let her know help is coming? Possibly, Ruby admitted, but I'll need a distraction, something to draw attention away from the back building where they're keeping her. Rebecca, who had been studying the tunnel map spread before them, looked up. What about a false message? Something to make them think there's dissension in their ranks? Elaborate? Sarah prompted, intrigued. The schoolteacher traced a section of the map with her finger. These tunnels extend far enough to come up near their camp. What if we planted a letter, something that suggested one of Blackwell's own men was planning to betray him? It would sow discord, make them suspicious of each other. Eleanor nodded slowly. Psychological warfare. Turn them against each other while we prepare our real attack. I can write it, Rebecca continued, warming to her idea. A convincing letter that implies one of the men who disappeared was planning to take the gang's money and run. And while they're distracted by internal suspicion, Clara added, Ruby can check on Margaret and perhaps Willow can scout the rest of their defenses. Sarah felt a surge of pride in these women, their intelligence, their resourcefulness, their refusal to be victims. Let's do it. Rebecca, draft that letter. Make it convincing. Ruby, prepare for your visit tonight. Willow, you'll need to place that letter where it will be found, but not in a way that raises suspicion. As the women dispersed to their tasks, Sarah turned to Eli. I need you to show me every inch of those tunnels you've explored. I need to know exactly where they lead, especially near the old mines. The boy nodded eagerly, pleased to have an important role. I mapped part of them yesterday while you were meeting. There's a branch that goes really close to the mining office, just like Eleanor said. Sarah ruffled his hair, a rare smile softening her features. Lead the way, Scout. The tunnels beneath Redemption Springs were a revelation, a complex network of passages dug during conflicts long past and forgotten by most. They smelled of earth and time, the air cool and still. Sarah and Eli moved carefully, guided by lantern light and the boys' increasingly confident directions. This one goes under the main street, Eli explained, pointing down a narrow passage. And this one leads toward the church. Sarah noted each turn, each junction, committing the layout to memory. And the one Eleanor mentioned, the one that goes near the mining office. Eli's face lit up with excitement. That's the best one. Follow me. He led her through a series of turns, the ceiling gradually lowering until they had to stoop to continue. The passage ended at a crude wooden ladder leading up to what appeared to be a trapdoor. Where does this come out? Sarah asked, studying the construction. There's an old shed about 50 yards from the mining office, Eli replied. The door's hidden under some crates, but they're empty. I looked yesterday. Sarah's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and concern. You went outside the tunnels alone. The boy had the grace to look sheepish. Just for a minute. I was careful, Sarah. Nobody saw me. She wanted to scold him for taking such a risk, but his initiative might have provided them with exactly the advantage they needed. Show me, she said instead. They climbed the ladder cautiously. Eli pushed against the trapdoor, revealing a dusty space filled with abandoned mining equipment. Shafts of sunlight pierced the gloom through gaps in the weathered boards. Sarah peered through one such gap, orienting herself. The mining office was visible, just as Eli had described, close enough to observe but partially screened by scrub brush and a slight rise in the terrain. Perfect, she murmured. This would be their surveillance post and potentially their entry point for Margaret's rescue. As they descended back into the tunnel, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. With this access, they could monitor Blackwell's movements, perhaps even overhear conversations if they got close enough. You've done well, Eli, she said, squeezing his shoulder. This could make all the difference. The boy beamed under her praise, momentarily looking like the child he was supposed to be, rather than the junior soldier's circumstances had forced him to become. When they returned to Eleanor's cottage, they found Rebecca bent over the kitchen table, carefully drafting the forged letter. Her handwriting, normally precise and elegant, had been deliberately altered to a cruder style. "How's this?" she asked, sliding the paper toward Sarah. "Dawson got word from Hollow Creek. Buyer still interested in our arrangement. Says he'll pay double what the boss promised for the redemption hall. Meet at the Split Rock after your shift on Thursday. Bring the map. Don't tell the others less to split. Smith's getting suspicious." Sarah nodded appreciatively. Vague enough to be believable, specific enough to raise serious questions. "Who's Dawson?" "One of Blackwell's lieutenants." Ruby supplied from the doorway where she'd been listening. "He's the one in charge when Blackwell isn't around. They don't always see eye to eye." "Perfect," Sarah said. "Willow, can you plant this tonight somewhere it might have been dropped accidentally?" The young woman nodded. "Near their patrol route. I can make it appear to have fallen from someone's pocket." As dusk approached, they finalized their plans. Ruby would visit the camp under the pretext of bringing whiskey and companionship, using the opportunity to gather intelligence and potentially make contact with Margaret. Willow would shadow her at a distance, placing the forged letter where it would be discovered by one of Blackwell's men. Meanwhile, Sarah, Clara, and Rebecca would prepare the town's defenses, focusing on the tunnel system as both their communication network and their primary tactical advantage. "Be careful," Sarah told Ruby and Willow as they prepared to leave. "If anything seems wrong, abort immediately. We need information, but not at the cost of your lives." Ruby flashed a brittle smile, adjusting her low-cut dress with practiced hands. "Don't worry about me, honey. I've been managing dangerous men since I was 15. Willow said nothing, but her dark eyes met Sarah's with quiet assurance. She would complete her mission or die trying. It was as simple as that. As the two women departed, Ruby openly on the road with a basket containing the doctored whiskey, Willow silently through the gathering shadows. Sarah turned her attention to their defensive preparations. "Clara, I need you to inventory every weapon and round of ammunition in town," she instructed. "Eleanor, continue preparing your medicines, both healing and harmful. Rebecca, you'll coordinate our communications through the tunnel system." "What about you?" Eleanor asked. Sarah checked her revolvers, a grim determination settling over her features. "I'm going to teach every woman in this town who's willing to learn how to shoot, starting now." By midnight, Sarah had drilled a dozen women on basic firearms handling. Most had never fired a gun before, but necessity proved a powerful motivator. They practiced in the church basement, using the thick stone walls to muffle the sound of dry firing. "Aim for center mass," Sarah instructed a nervous young mother who had volunteered despite her obvious fear. "Don't try for fancy shots. Just point and squeeze like I showed you." The woman nodded her hands, steadying on the revolver as she gained confidence. "For Margaret," she whispered, "and for all of us." Sarah moved among them, correcting grips, adjusting stances, encouraging progress. These were not natural fighters. They were shopkeepers, mothers, farm wives. But they were fighting for their homes, their children, their very lives. That made them dangerous in ways Blackwell could not anticipate. The sound of running footsteps in the tunnel caused everyone to freeze. Sarah drew her gun instinctively before recognizing Eli's distinctive gait. The boy burst into the church basement, breathing hard. "They're back. Ruby and Willow are back." Sarah holstered her weapon. "Continue practicing," she told the women. "Remember, aim, breathe, squeeze." She followed Eli through the tunnel to Eleanor's cottage, where Ruby was slumped in a kitchen chair, a livid bruise darkening her cheekbone. Willow stood nearby, her expression unreadable, as Eleanor tended to Ruby's injury. "What happened?" Sarah demanded. Ruby winced as Eleanor applied a cool cloth to her face. "Delivered the whiskey as planned. Most of the men were eager enough for it. Made contact with Davis Margaret's guard. He took me to see her. And," Sarah prompted when Ruby paused, "she's alive. Scared but unharmed so far." Ruby's eyes hardened. "Blackwell's saving her for when he owns the town, as he puts it. Some kind of symbolic claiming?" Sarah's hands curled into fists. "You said most of the men took the whiskey. Who didn't? Blackwell himself. And that's where things went sideways." Ruby touched her bruised cheek gingerly. He caught me asking too many questions about the camp layout. Got suspicious. If Davis hadn't intervened claiming he'd already paid for my time, it could have been worse. Sarah turned to Willow. And the letter. A ghost of a smile touched the young woman's lips. Planted where one of the perimeter guards will find it during morning patrol, near Dawson's usual route. Did you see anything else? Anything about the mines or the men working them? Willow nodded slowly. There's activity at the old north shaft. Guards posted. I couldn't get close enough to see more, but there's definitely something happening there. Hope and dread warred in Sarah's chest. If men were working those mines officially declared depleted years ago, then Jack might truly be alive. But the conditions would be brutal, possibly fatal over time. We need to adjust our timeline, she decided. Blackwell's suspicions are rising. If he connects Ruby's questions to the missing men, he might move against the town before his deadline. The whiskey should help, Eleanor offered. By morning, most of his men will be suffering mightily. That buys us some time. And the letter will sow discord, Rebecca added, especially if Dawson denies any knowledge of it. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. We'll use that confusion to our advantage. Tomorrow, Eli and I will scout the north mine shaft through the tunnels. Clara, you and Rebecca continue preparing the town's defenses. Eleanor, make sure everyone knows how to use the tunnel system if we need to evacuate quickly. As the others dispersed to their tasks, Sarah pulled Ruby aside. Did you see anything else at the camp? Anything that might help us? The woman hesitated, her painted lips pressing into a thin line. They're planning something big after they take the town. I overheard Blackwell talking with his lieutenant. Something about the railroad coming through, how the land would be worth 10 times what it is now once the tracks are laid. Sarah frowned. The railroad. There's been talk for years, but nothing official. Well, Blackwell seems mighty certain, Ruby replied. Mentioned someone named Downey providing the information. Richard Downey. Sarah's blood ran cold. The banker. Ruby nodded. That's the one. Sounds like they've got some kind of arrangement. Blackwell clears the town, Downey buys the land cheap from frightened sellers, then they both profit when the railroad comes through. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Richard Downey, the respectable banker who had handled the payment to the widows after the mine collapse. The man who had seemed so sympathetic, so concerned for their welfare. That bastard, Sarah whispered. He's been planning this all along. She paced the small kitchen, anger burning like wildfire through her veins. Downey must have known the gold mine wasn't depleted. He arranged the accident that supposedly killed the miners, including Jack. Then he brought in Blackwell to clear out what remained of the town. But why keep the miners alive? Eleanor asked, having overheard the conversation. Why not just kill them? Free labor, Sarah replied grimly. Men everyone believes are already dead, can't escape, can't complain, can't be missed. Perfect slaves for extracting whatever gold remains in those mines. The implications staggered her. If Downey had arranged the mine collapse that supposedly killed Jack and the others, then he was responsible for 5 years of grief, of broken lives, of children growing up fatherless. 5 years Sarah had spent in isolated mourning, while her husband potentially suffered in darkness beneath the earth. We need to confront Downey, she said, her voice dangerously soft. Tonight. Eleanor laid a restraining hand on her arm. Not tonight, not alone. We stick to the plan, Sarah. Scout the mine shaft first, confirm your suspicions, then we adjust our strategy accordingly. The wisdom in Eleanor's words penetrated Sarah's rage. Acting on emotion now could jeopardize everything: Margaret's rescue, the town's defense, any chance of freeing the men in the mines. You're right, she conceded reluctantly, but Downey will answer for this. I swear it. The night passed in uneasy vigilance. Sarah slept fitfully on Eleanor's sofa, her dreams haunted by Jack's face, not as she remembered him, but gaunt and broken from years of captivity. She woke before dawn, her resolve hardened like tempered steel. Eli was already up quietly helping Eleanor prepare a simple breakfast. The boy's resilience constantly amazed Sarah, how he adapted to each new crisis with determination beyond his years. Ready to explore, Scout? She asked, ruffling his hair as she passed. He nodded eagerly. I found another tunnel branch yesterday. It might go toward the north shaft. After breakfast, they entered the tunnel system once more, this time following a passage that curved gradually northward. The air grew noticeably cooler as they progressed, the walls showing signs of more professional mining work, rather than the hasty wartime construction of the other tunnels. This was part of the original mine, Sarah realized, examining the support beams. Before they expanded operations to the main shaft, Eli pointed ahead to where the tunnel forked. Which way? Sarah considered, then pointed left. That one slopes upward. Might bring us closer to the surface near the north shaft. They proceeded cautiously, the tunnel narrowing and the ceiling lowering until they were crouching to continue. The sound of their breathing seemed unnaturally loud in the confined space. Suddenly, Eli froze. "Listen," he whispered. Sarah held her breath, straining her ears. At first she heard nothing beyond the beating of her own heart. Then faint but unmistakable, the rhythmic sound of metal striking stone, and voices too distant to distinguish words but clearly human. "The miners," she breathed. "We must be close to the north shaft operation." They advanced with painstaking care, each step calculated to avoid dislodging loose stones or creating noise. The sounds grew clearer, men working, occasional shouts from overseers, the creak of equipment. The tunnel ended at a crude wooden wall hastily constructed to seal off this section from the main mine. But age had warped the boards, creating gaps through which light filtered weakly. Sarah pressed her eye to one such gap, her heart hammering against her ribs. The scene beyond confirmed her worst fears and wildest hopes simultaneously. A dozen men worked in an expanded chamber, breaking rock and loading ore carts. They were filthy, emaciated, moving with the slow deliberation of the exhausted. Armed guards stood at intervals, rifles ready, and there bent over a cart a man with hair the color of wheat straw, now streaked with dust and grime. A man whose profile, even gaunt with deprivation, she would know in the darkest night. Jack. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, stifling the sob that threatened to escape. He was alive. Changed, damaged, but alive. Eli tugged at her sleeve, his eyes wide with question. She nodded once, confirmation enough for the boy who had loved Jack like a father. They watched in silence as the miners worked, memorizing the guard patterns, the layout of the chamber, the equipment used. Valuable intelligence for when they returned to free the prisoners. A shout from one of the guards made them both flinch. "Break time's over, back to work, all of you." The miners shuffled to their positions with the resigned movements of men who had learned that resistance meant pain. Sarah's heart ached watching Jack, once so proud and strong, bow his head in submission. "We need to go," she whispered to Eli. "We have what we came for." The boy nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on Jack's distant figure. Reluctantly, they retreated the way they had come, carrying the weight of what they'd witnessed. By midday, Sarah had assembled her core group once more. The discovery of Jack and the other miners alive changed everything, adding both urgency and complexity to their plans. "We need to coordinate 3 operations now," she explained, spreading the map across Eleanor's table. "Town defense, Margaret's rescue, and freeing the miners." Clara shook her head. "That's impossible with our numbers. We have to prioritize." "We prioritize all of them," Sarah replied firmly, "because they're connected. Blackwell's men guard both Margaret and the mines. Strike in one place, we create vulnerability in another." Rebecca studied the map thoughtfully. "What if we use Blackwell's deadline against him? He expects the town to be empty in 3 days. What if we appear to comply?" "You mean evacuate?" Ruby asked skeptically. "Appear to evacuate," Rebecca clarified. "Make it look like we're abandoning Redemption Springs. Most women and children actually leave, go to neighboring settlements temporarily, but we remain hidden in the tunnels." Sarah caught the thread of Rebecca's thinking. "When Blackwell and his men come to claim an empty town, we spring the trap." Willow finished, a predatory gleam in her dark eyes. The plan took shape as they discussed it, layers of deception and strategy that would turn the hunters into the hunted. Women and children would visibly pack wagons and depart, spreading word that Redemption Springs was surrendering to Blackwell's demands. Meanwhile, Sarah's fighters would position themselves strategically throughout the tunnel system, ready to emerge when Blackwell's guard was lowest. Willow's traps would be expanded, creating killing zones where the gang would be most vulnerable. Ruby would return to the camp one more time, delivering the message that the town was emptying. She would also try to get word to Margaret to be ready for rescue. "And what about the miners?" Eli asked, his young voice steady with determination. "What about Jack?" Sarah placed her hand on the boy's shoulder. We'll create a diversion at the main camp. When the guards at the mine respond, we'll move in through the tunnel access we found. It's risky, Eleanor warned, spreading ourselves so thin. Everything about this is risky, Sarah acknowledged, but it's our best chance to save everyone and end Blackwell's threat permanently. As the meeting concluded, Rebecca held Sarah back with a gentle touch on her arm. There's something else you should know. I was in the church this morning, checking our ammunition stores, and I found this. She handed Sarah a small leather-bound Bible. It was tucked into the hymnal shelf. I almost missed it. What is it? Sarah asked, taking the book. Open it, Rebecca urged. Sarah did, finding a folded paper tucked between the pages. She spread it open to reveal a crude map, different from the tunnel layout they had been using. This one showed the mining office and surrounding terrain with markings indicating guard positions, schedules, and a planned route of attack. This is Blackwell's assault plan, Sarah breathed, studying the notations. But how, Ruby, Rebecca explained. She must have taken it from the camp during her visit and hidden it here for safekeeping. Sarah's eyes widened as she noted the date marked for the main assault, the anniversary of Jack's supposed death. 2 days from now, not 3, as Blackwell had publicly declared. He's planning to move early, she realized, to catch us unprepared. We need to accelerate everything, Rebecca agreed. Sarah nodded grimly, tucking the map into her pocket. Gather everyone. We move tonight. As dusk fell, an unusual flurry of activity gripped Redemption Springs. Wagons were loaded with belongings. Tearful goodbyes exchanged, families departing with backward glances at the only homes many had ever known. To any observer particularly, Blackwell's watchful scouts, it appeared the town was surrendering, emptying itself ahead of the deadline. But beneath this visible exodus, a different story unfolded. In the tunnels, women prepared weapons and positions. Willow completed her network of traps and snares. Claire and Eleanor prepared their doctored supplies, food and drink that would weaken rather than nourish any who consumed them. Sarah found Ruby in the church, praying quietly in a back pew. The bruise on her cheek had darkened to purple, a visible reminder of the dangers they faced. Are you sure you're up for this? Sarah asked softly, sliding into the pew beside her. Ruby smiled thinly. Born ready, honey. One more performance for the men who think they own the world. Sarah hesitated, then placed her hand over Ruby's. Thank you for the map. It might save us all. The other woman's eyes widened briefly before understanding dawned. Rebecca found it then. Good. I wasn't sure I'd hidden it well enough. It was perfect, Sarah assured her, and it changes everything. We know when they're coming now. We'll be ready. As Ruby departed for her final mission to Blackwell's camp, delivering news of the town's surrender and attempting one last contact with Margaret, Sarah sought out Eli. She found him in Eleanor's kitchen, solemnly packing medical supplies into a satchel. Eleanor's teaching me which herbs stop bleeding, he explained, his small fingers working with careful precision. For when we rescue Jack and the others. Sarah's heart constricted with love and fear for this brave, resilient child. Eli, I need to talk to you about tonight's plan. He looked up, instantly alert to the change in her tone. I know my job. I stay with Eleanor in the tunnel command post and run messages. That was the plan, Sarah acknowledged. But things have changed. We've learned Blackwell intends to attack tomorrow, not the day after. Everything's happening faster than we expected. The boy's brow furrowed. So what's my new job? Sarah took a deep breath. This was the hardest part of her plan, but perhaps the most necessary. You're going with the last wagon out of town, the one taking the youngest children to Golden Creek. No! Eli's face flushed with anger and betrayal. I won't leave, not when Jack needs us. Eli, you promised I could help. His voice cracked with emotion. You can't send me away now. Sarah knelt before him, taking his trembling hands in hers. Listen to me, Eli. You have helped more than anyone. You found the tunnels. You located Jack. Without you, none of our plans would be possible. Then why? Because I need to know you're safe, Sarah interrupted gently. Because Jack would never forgive me if I let anything happen to you. Because you deserve a future beyond this fight. Tears welled in Eli's eyes, spilling down his cheeks. But what if you don't come back? What if Jack doesn't come back? I'll be alone again. The raw fear in his voice broke something in Sarah's heart. She pulled him close. feeling his small body shake with suppressed sobs. "That's not going to happen," she promised fiercely. "We're coming back, all of us. And when we do, we'll find you at Golden Creek, and we'll be a family again, the way we were meant to be." Eli pulled back, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. "You swear it?" Sarah nodded solemnly. "I swear it on everything I hold dear." The boy considered this for a long moment, his young face serious beyond his years. Finally, he nodded once, a man's decision in a child's body. "All right, I'll go, but you better keep your promise, Sarah Blackwood." She smiled, ruffling his hair one last time. "That's the plan, little man. That's the plan." As night deepened over Redemption Springs, the last wagon departed, carrying Eli and the youngest children to safety in Golden Creek. Sarah watched until it disappeared from sight, then turned back to the seemingly deserted town. Now the real work began. The women of Redemption Springs moved like shadows through their own streets, positioning themselves according to their carefully crafted plan. They were few against many, but they possessed advantages their enemies couldn't imagine: intimate knowledge of the terrain, the element of surprise, and the desperate strength of those with nothing left to lose. In Eleanor's cottage, now serving as their command center, Sarah addressed her core group one final time. "Tonight we reclaim what was taken from us," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Our homes, our safety, our loved ones. Blackwell came here thinking we would surrender without a fight. He's about to learn how wrong he was." Clara checked her shotgun with practiced hands. "For Sheriff Miller." Rebecca adjusted the revolver at her hip, a weapon she had never fired in anger before tonight. "For the future of our town." Eleanor packed the last of her medical supplies, her aged fingers moving with renewed purpose. "For justice delayed, but not denied." Ruby returned from her mission to the camp with news that Margaret was ready for rescue, straightened her shoulders. "For every woman they thought they could use and discard." Willow said nothing, but her dark eyes gleamed with the promise of retribution for a lifetime of wrongs. Sarah looked at these women, so different from each other, yet united now in common cause, and felt a surge of fierce pride. "For Redemption Springs," she said simply, "and for all of us." As they moved to their positions, Ruby fell into step beside Sarah. "Downey's at the camp," she murmured. "Arrived just before I left. He and Blackwell were celebrating their arrangement in the main office." Sarah's hand tightened on her gun. "Good. Saves us the trouble of hunting him down later." The banker would face justice alongside Blackwell, answering for the years of deception, for the lives destroyed by his greed. The thought steadied Sarah's resolve as they entered the tunnel that would lead them beneath their enemies. The hour of reckoning had arrived. By dawn, Redemption Springs would either be truly free for the first time in years, or it would become a ghost town in more than just name, haunted by the memory of women who dared to fight when the world expected them to flee. Sarah Blackwood checked her weapons one last time and moved forward into darkness, leaving behind the woman she had been and embracing the fighter she needed to become. Midnight shrouded Redemption Springs in velvet darkness. The town appeared abandoned. Windows, shuttered doors locked the main street, empty save for occasional tumbleweeds stirred by the restless wind. Only the saloon showed signs of life, a single lamp burning in an upstairs window. Ruby's signal that all was in place. Beneath the silent streets, Sarah moved through the tunnels with the quiet confidence of a predator. Clara and Rebecca flanked her weapons, ready expressions set with grim determination. They'd rehearsed this approach a dozen times since dusk: the route to the mining office, the timing of their attack, the signals they would use. Eleanor remained at the tunnel junction beneath the church, their field hospital and command center. Willow had already departed, melting into the shadows to position herself near the north mine shaft, where Jack and the other prisoners were held. "Remember," Sarah whispered as they reached the ladder leading to the shed near the mining office, "we move only when Ruby's distraction begins. Margaret is our first priority. Once she's secure, we deal with Blackwell and Downey." Clara and Rebecca nodded, their faces pale in the lantern's glow, but resolute. Sarah extinguished the light before ascending the ladder, pushing open the trap door with exquisite care. The abandoned shed remained as Eli had described it, filled with rusting equipment, its wooden walls weathered enough to provide convenient viewing gaps, without exposing them to observation. Through one such gap, Sarah studied the mining office complex. The main building stood dark and silent, but the smaller structure where Margaret was held showed lamplight through its single window. A guard paced outside, rifle slung over his shoulder, occasionally pausing to spit tobacco juice into the dust. "Davis," Sarah murmured, recognizing Margaret's primary jailer from Ruby's description. "Just one guard. That's promising. What about the main office?" Clara whispered, peering through another gap. "Any sign of Blackwell or Downey?" Sarah shifted position, focusing on the larger building. "No movement, but there's light visible beneath the door. They're in there planning tomorrow's attack." Rebecca checked her pocket watch by the faint moonlight filtering through the shed's roof. "Ruby should begin her diversion in 5 minutes. Are we ready?" Sarah felt the familiar calm that always preceded action, a stillness where doubts vanished and only purpose remained. "We're ready." The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Sarah used them to memorize every detail of their surroundings, the distance between buildings, the positions of hitched horses, the patterns of Davis's pacing. Any advantage, however small, could mean the difference between success and failure. Precisely on time, a commotion erupted from the direction of the main camp. Shouts followed by the distinctive sound of glass breaking and men cursing. "That's Ruby," Sarah whispered, a hint of admiration in her voice. Whatever distraction the woman had created, it was effective. Davis's head snapped toward the noise. He hesitated, clearly torn between investigating and maintaining his post. A louder crash, followed by angry yelling, decided him. "Damn it," he muttered, audible in the night stillness. "What the hell are those idiots up to now?" He hammered on the door of Margaret's prison. "Stay put, girl. I'll be right back." The moment Davis disappeared around the corner of the main building, Sarah moved. She slipped from the shed like a shadow, Clara and Rebecca following close behind. They crossed the open ground in seconds, flattening themselves against the wall of the small structure. Sarah tried the door, locked as expected. She nodded to Clara, who produced a small pry bar from her coat. With practiced efficiency, Clara worked the tool into the jamb beside the lock. Wood splintered softly as the door gave way. Inside, Margaret Thompson sat on a narrow cot, her face lighting with hope and fear as Sarah entered. The girl's clothes were rumpled, her blonde hair tangled, but she appeared physically unharmed. "Sarah," she whispered, disbelief coloring her voice. "Is it really you?" "It's me," Sarah confirmed, crossing quickly to the girl's side. "Can you walk?" Margaret nodded, rising shakily. I thought no one was coming." "We would never abandon you," Sarah assured her, guiding her toward the door where Rebecca waited. "But we need to move fast. Rebecca will take you through the tunnels to Eleanor. You'll be safe there." The school teacher took Margaret's arm gently. "Stay close to me. Don't make a sound no matter what you hear." As Rebecca and Margaret slipped away toward the shed in the tunnel entrance, Sarah turned to Clara. "Now for phase 2. They approached the main office building with weapons drawn, using the shadows for cover. The voices inside grew more distinct, men arguing, their tones harsh with disagreement. Sarah recognized Blackwell's deep rumble immediately. The other voice, higher and more refined, must belong to Downey. "Told you to wait until I secured the property deeds." Downey was saying, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Moving early risks everything." "I don't take orders from you, banker," Blackwell replied, contempt evident in his tone. "Your precious deeds mean nothing if we don't control the town physically. The railroad surveyors will be here in 2 weeks. We need legal ownership before they arrive, or the whole plan falls apart." Sarah and Clara exchanged glances. The confirmation of their suspicions, spoken plainly by the conspirators themselves, sent a surge of vindication through Sarah's veins. A sudden crash from the direction of the main camp interrupted the argument inside. Blackwell cursed loudly. "What the hell is going on out there?" His heavy footsteps approached the door. Sarah nodded to Clara. They positioned themselves on either side of the entrance, weapons ready. The door burst open. Blackwell silhouetted against the lamplight from within. Before he could register their presence, Sarah struck, driving the butt of her revolver against his temple with all her strength. The big man staggered but didn't fall. He whirled toward her, surprisingly fast for his size, reaching for his gun. Clara's shotgun pressed against his spine. "I wouldn't," she advised coldly. Inside the office, Downey froze behind a cluttered desk, his banker's composure shattered by the sudden intrusion. His hand inched toward a drawer. "Touch that drawer and I'll put a bullet between your eyes." Sarah warned, her voice deadly calm. Hands where I can see them. Downey complied, his face pale with shock and fear. Sarah Blackwood, what is the meaning of this? You know exactly what this is, Sarah replied, her gun unwavering. Justice for Jack and all the other men you buried alive for profit. Recognition flickered in Downey's eyes, followed by calculation. I don't know what you're talking about. There was an accident at the mine. Save your lies, Sarah cut him off. We found them. The men you've kept as slaves. The gold mine you claimed was depleted. Blackwell chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. So the widows figured it out. Doesn't change anything. My men outnumber you 20-1. As if on cue, a series of explosions rocked the Night Willow's traps being triggered near the main camp. Shouts of confusion and pain followed, then scattered gunfire. You might want to reconsider that math, Clara suggested with grim satisfaction. Sarah gestured with her gun. Both of you on your knees, hands behind your heads. Downey immediately complied, his courage evaporating in the face of real danger. Blackwell, however, remained standing, his eyes calculating as he assessed Sarah. You don't have the stomach for this widow, he said softly. I can see it in your eyes. You're not a killer. You're wrong, Sarah replied, her voice steady. 5 years ago, I might have hesitated, but you made one crucial mistake, Blackwell. And what's that? Sarah's eyes hardened. You threatened what I love. There's nothing I won't do to protect it now. Before Blackwell could respond, more explosions erupted from the direction of the North Mine Shaft. Willow had begun the second phase of their plan, the diversion that would draw guards away from the imprisoned miners. The momentary distraction was all Blackwell needed. He lunged forward, knocking Sarah's gun aside with one powerful arm while reaching for Clara with the other. Clara discharged her shotgun, but Blackwell's movement caused the shot to go wide, splintering the office wall. He struck her hard, sending her crashing into a bookshelf that collapsed under her weight. Sarah recovered quickly, firing a shot that grazed Blackwell's shoulder. He roared in pain, but didn't slow, tackling her with the force of a charging bull. They crashed through the office door onto the dirt outside Sarah's gun, spinning from her grasp. Blackwell's hands found her throat, squeezing with murderous intent. Sarah clawed at his face, seeking vulnerable points, eyes, throat, anything to break his grip. As darkness began to edge her vision, a shot rang out. Blackwell's body jerked, his grip loosening slightly. Another shot, and he toppled sideways, blood blooming across his chest. Sarah rolled away, gasping for air, to find Ruby standing a few yards away, a smoking revolver in her hand. The woman's dress was torn, her hair disheveled, but her aim had been true. Figured you might need some help, Ruby said, helping Sarah to her feet. The distraction worked better than expected. Half of Blackwell's men are either passed out from the doctored whiskey or chasing ghosts through the brush. Downey, Sarah managed between ragged breaths. In the office. But when they turned back to the building, they found only Clara, dazed but conscious, struggling to her feet amidst the wreckage of the bookshelf. He ran, she reported grimly. Slipped out while you and Blackwell were fighting. Sarah cursed, retrieving her fallen revolver. He'll head for the main camp, try to rally Blackwell's men. Let him, Ruby replied with cold satisfaction. Willow's waiting on that route. He won't get far. Gunfire continued to echo from multiple directions, evidence that the battle for Redemption Springs was unfolding according to their plan. Women positioned throughout the town and tunnels were engaging Blackwell's disoriented men, creating an illusion of numbers and forcing the outlaws to divide their attention. Clara, can you make it back to the tunnel entrance? Sarah asked, helping the older woman steady herself. Clara nodded, wincing as she touched a gash on her forehead. I'm fine. Just knock the wind out of me. What about you two? We're going to the north shaft, Sarah replied, checking her ammunition. It's time to free Jack and the others. Ruby fell in beside her without hesitation. Lead the way. They moved through the chaos of the camp, using the confusion to their advantage. Most of Blackwell's men were focused on threats from the town itself, leaving the path to the north shaft relatively clear. As they approached, Sarah could see Willow's handiwork. 2 guards lay unmoving near the entrance, taken down silently with her Apache hunting skills. Another lay a few yards away, a knife protruding from his chest. Willow herself appeared from the shadows, acknowledging them with a slight nod. 4 more inside, she reported quietly. Armed, nervous after the explosions. Sarah assessed the shaft entrance, a crude timber structure supporting a tunnel that plunged into darkness. Lantern light flickered from within, along with the sounds of agitated voices. "We need to draw them out," she whispered. "One or two at a time." Ruby smiled thinly. "Leave that to me." Before Sarah could stop her, Ruby tore her dress, further smeared dirt on her face, and staggered toward the entrance, affecting terror and exhaustion. "Help!" she cried, her voice breaking convincingly. "They're killing everyone. Blackwell's dead." A guard appeared at the entrance, rifle raised. "What the hell?" Ruby collapsed dramatically at his feet. "Please, they came out of nowhere. Women with guns." The guard hesitated, then called over his shoulder. "Mason, get out here." A second man emerged immediately, lowering his weapon at the sight of Ruby's prostrate form. "What happened? Who's attacking?" The moment both men were fully exposed, Sarah and Willow fired simultaneously. The guards dropped without a sound, clean shots that offered no chance for alarm. 2 down, 2 to go. Ruby rose smoothly, retrieving one of the fallen men's rifles. "Shall we?" They entered the mine shaft in tight formation, Sarah in the lead, Ruby and Willow covering their flanks. The tunnel descended steeply, the air growing thick with dust and the distinctive metallic scent of raw ore. Voices echoed ahead, agitated and confused. "What the hell was that? Sounded like shots. Check on the prisoners. If they try anything, shoot the first one who moves." Sarah quickened her pace, heart pounding with urgency. The tunnel opened into the chamber she had observed earlier, with Eli now illuminated by several lanterns that cast long shadows across the rough-hewn walls. The remaining 2 guards stood near the miners, who were chained together in groups of 3. Jack was among them, his head raised at the commotion, a defiant light in his eyes despite his emaciated condition. Sarah signaled to Ruby and Willow, indicating they should spread out to create crossfire. Then she stepped into the chamber, both revolvers leveled. "Drop your weapons," she commanded, her voice ringing with authority. "Now!" The guards whirled in surprise, fumbling for their guns. One was too slow. Willow's shot took him in the chest before his weapon cleared its holster. The other managed to fire wildly, the bullet striking rock near Sarah's head, sending fragments flying. Sarah's answering shots were methodical and precise, 2 rapid reports that found their mark in the guard's center mass. He collapsed beside his companion, dead before he hit the ground. For a moment, silence filled the chamber, broken only by the ragged breathing of the imprisoned miners. Then Jack's voice, hoarse with disbelief. "Sarah." She turned toward him, tears threatening to blur her vision. 5 years of grief and loneliness crystallized in this single moment of recognition. "Jack," she whispered, holstering one gun to reach for the keys hanging from a hook near the guard station. He staggered to his feet as far as his chains would allow, his once powerful frame now gaunt and scarred. But his eyes, those remained unchanged, burning with the same fierce spirit she had fallen in love with. "You're alive," he said, wonder mixing with pain in his voice. "They told us everyone thought we were dead, that no one was looking for us anymore." Sarah unlocked his shackles with trembling hands. "I never stopped looking, not in my heart." The moment he was free, Jack pulled her into an embrace that defied his weakened state. Sarah clung to him, breathing in his scent, beneath the years of dust and suffering, feeling the solidity of him that she had thought lost forever. "Eli," he asked against her hair, his first thought for the boy they had raised together. "Safe," Sarah assured him, "waiting for us both at Golden Creek." Around them, Ruby and Willow were freeing the other miners, 11 men in total, each with their own story of loss and endurance. Some wept openly at their liberation. Others stood in stunned silence, as if afraid to believe their captivity had truly ended. "Can you walk?" Sarah asked Jack, noting how he swayed slightly, even while standing still. He nodded determination, straightening his spine. "I've been waiting 5 years for this moment. Wild horses couldn't keep me down now." As they guided the freed miners toward the tunnel exit, Jack suddenly stopped. "Downey," he said, his voice hardening. "He was behind it all. He arranged the collapse, made a deal with the foreman to trap us instead of rescue us." "I know," Sarah replied grimly. "He was working with Blackwell. The banker's greed and the outlaws' violence, a partnership made in hell." "Blackwell's dead," Ruby informed them, supporting an older miner who struggled to walk. "Sarah and I saw to that, but Downey escaped during the fight." Jack's eyes met Sarah's, a silent understanding passing between them. He can't be allowed to get away. Not after everything he's done. He won't, Sarah promised. Willow's watching the trails. And the women of Redemption Springs control the town now. There's nowhere for him to run. They emerged from the mine shaft into chaos. The battle had spread throughout the camp and into the town beyond. Gunfire echoed sporadically, but it was clear the tide had turned. Blackwell's men, deprived of leadership and subjected to multiple attacks from unexpected quarters, were in disarray. Sarah led their group toward the tunnel entrance hidden in the abandoned shed. The freed miners would be safer underground, away from the ongoing conflict, and Eleanor's medical skills were desperately needed for their numerous injuries. As they approached the shed, a figure lunged from the shadows, Downey, his banker's suit torn and dirty, a wild desperation in his eyes. He held a revolver that wavered between Sarah and Jack. "Stop right there," he ordered, his cultured voice cracking with strain. "All of you." Sarah instinctively moved in front of Jack, shielding his weakened body with her own. "It's over, Downey. Blackwell's dead. His men are defeated. There's nowhere left to run." Downey's laugh held a note of hysteria. "You think I didn't plan for contingencies? There's a horse waiting behind the ridge. Gold cached where no one will find it. I just need a hostage to ensure my safe passage." His gaze settled on Sarah. "You'll do nicely, Mrs. Blackwood. Poetic, isn't it? Husband and wife reunited only to be separated again." Jack tensed behind Sarah, his hand finding hers in silent communication. She squeezed once, "Trust me," before addressing Downey again. "You won't shoot me," she said with quiet confidence. "You need me alive as a shield." "True," Downey conceded, his gun hand steadying. "But I don't need him alive." He shifted his aim toward Jack. Sarah moved without thinking, launching herself at Downey just as he fired. The bullet grazed her shoulder, a line of fire that she barely registered through the surge of protective rage. They crashed to the ground together, struggling for control of the gun. Downey was stronger than his refined appearance suggested, the desperation of a cornered rat lending him power. The gun discharged again, the bullet burying itself harmlessly in the dirt. Sarah slammed Downey's wrist against a rock once, twice, until his fingers loosened their grip on the weapon. Just as she reached for the fallen revolver, Downey landed a blow to her wounded shoulder that sent waves of pain through her body. He scrambled for the gun, his fingers closing around it with triumphant malice. A shot rang out, but not from Downey's weapon. The banker jerked backward, a look of profound surprise crossing his features as a crimson stain blossomed on his chest. He turned slightly as if to identify his attacker before collapsing face first into the dust. Behind him stood Jack, swaying but upright, holding Ruby's discarded revolver in a steady grip despite his weakened state. "For 5 years in darkness," he said softly, "for the men who didn't survive, for what you stole from all of us." Sarah rose shakily, pressing a hand to her bleeding shoulder. Jack moved to her side, supporting her despite his own frailty. "You're hurt," he observed, concern displacing the cold fury that had animated him moments before. "It's nothing," Sarah assured him, though the wound burned fiercely. "We need to get everyone underground. The battle isn't over yet." As if to emphasize her point, another explosion rocked the night, one of Willow's larger traps being triggered near the town border. The distinctive boom of Clara's shotgun followed, then scattered rifle fire. They hurried the miners into the tunnel entrance, Ruby taking the lead to guide them through the darkness toward Eleanor's makeshift hospital. Sarah and Jack followed, last neither willing to release the other, even for a moment. The journey through the tunnels passed in a blur for Sarah. Blood loss and emotional exhaustion conspired to make each step more difficult than the last. Only Jack's presence, beside her, solid and real despite his diminished state, kept her moving forward. They emerged into Eleanor's underground sanctuary to find it transformed into a field hospital. Rebecca and several other women moved among makeshift pallets, tending to injuries both minor and severe. Margaret sat in a corner wrapped in a blanket, helping Eleanor prepare bandages. The sight of the freed miners caused a moment of stunned silence, followed by a flurry of activity as Eleanor directed her helpers to prepare more pallets and gather additional supplies. "Sarah, you're bleeding," the older woman observed sharply, moving to examine her shoulder. "Others need help more," Sarah protested weakly, gesturing toward the miners. Eleanor's expression brooked no argument. Sit. Now, before you fall. As Eleanor cleaned and bandaged her wound, Sarah kept her eyes on Jack, afraid he might disappear if she looked away for even a moment. He sat nearby, accepting water from Rebecca, with shaking hands, his gaze similarly fixed on Sarah. "Is it over?" she asked Eleanor quietly. "The fighting." The older woman nodded. "Nearly. Clara sent word through the tunnels. Most of Blackwell's men have either fled or surrendered. Those who resisted—" She left the sentence unfinished, but her meaning was clear. Relief washed over Sarah, momentarily stronger than the pain. They had done it against all odds. The women of Redemption Springs had defended their home and freed their men. The cost had been high, but the alternative would have been annihilation. "Eli," she asked, suddenly remembering her promise to the boy, "has there been any word from Golden Creek?" "A rider came through the tunnels about an hour ago," Eleanor replied, securing the bandage with practiced efficiency. "All the children arrived safely. Eli's waiting for you, just as you promised." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, a prayer of thanksgiving forming silently in her heart. One more promise kept. The hours that followed passed in a haze of activity and emotion. More wounded arrived, both from their side and Blackwell's men, who had surrendered. Eleanor treated all with equal care, her healer's oath transcending the battle lines. By dawn, a tentative quiet had settled over Redemption Springs. The last of the fighting had ended during the night, leaving a town damaged but unbroken. Women emerged from hiding places, surveying the destruction with weary determination, already turning toward rebuilding. Sarah found herself on the church steps as the sun rose, Jack beside her, his arm around her shoulders. They watched together as Clara and several others raised an improvised flag over the sheriff's office, a symbol of reclamation and renewal. "What happens now?" Jack asked softly, his voice still rough from years of dust and disuse. Sarah leaned into his embrace, mindful of both their injuries, but unwilling to sacrifice the contact. "We rebuild. We heal. We start again." "And Eli? What did you tell him about me?" "Nothing," Sarah admitted. "I couldn't bear to give him hope until I knew for certain. But he never stopped missing you, Jack. Never stopped needing you." Jack's arm tightened around her. 5 years in that darkness. Sometimes the only thing that kept me going was thinking of you both, imagining you safe and happy somewhere. "We weren't," Sarah said simply. "Not without you." They sat in companionable silence as the town gradually came to life around them. Women moved purposefully through the streets, clearing debris, checking structures, planning repairs. There was no hysteria, no panic, just the quiet efficiency of those accustomed to handling whatever challenges life presented. Ruby approached her saloon dress, replaced by practical trousers and a man's shirt, a rifle slung casually over her shoulder. "Eleanor says we can move the miners above ground now. The doctor from Golden Creek should arrive by midday." Jack nodded, rising stiffly. "Thank you for everything you did, all of you." Ruby's customary cynicism softened as she regarded him. "Don't thank us yet. The hard part's still coming, living with what happened, rebuilding what was lost." "We've done it before," Sarah said, standing beside Jack. "After the war, after the drought, after the mine collapse. Redemption Springs endures." "Yes, it does," Ruby agreed with a hint of pride. "But this time we're not just enduring, we're deciding our own fate." As they made their way toward Eleanor's cottage, where arrangements were being made to house the freed miners until they regained their strength, Sarah marveled at the transformation around her. Women who had once deferred to male authority now moved with the confidence of those who had faced the worst and prevailed. Rebecca had organized a cleanup brigade, methodically addressing the damage from building to building. Clara oversaw the distribution of supplies, ensuring no one went without necessities. Willow moved silently through the outskirts, retrieving her traps and keeping watch for any remaining threats. And through it all, an undercurrent of pride and accomplishment, these women had saved themselves when no one else would or could. "They're remarkable," Jack observed, following Sarah's gaze. "All of them." "They always were," Sarah replied. "They just needed the chance to prove it to themselves as much as anyone." 3 days later, a wagon train returned from Golden Creek, bringing the children and elderly back to Redemption Springs. Sarah and Jack stood at the edge of town to greet them, their wounds healing, their spirits strengthening with each day of reunion. Eli was among the first to jump down, his eyes scanning the crowd until he spotted them. For a moment he froze, disbelief and hope warring on his young face as he recognized Jack. Then he was running faster than Sarah had ever seen him move, launching himself into Jack's waiting arms with a cry that contained 5 years of grief and longing. "You came back!" The boy sobbed against Jack's shoulder. "You really came back." Jack held him tightly, his own eyes wet with tears. "I promised I didn't. I just took me a little longer than expected." Sarah wrapped her arms around them both, completing the circle of family that had been broken for too long. Around them, similar reunions unfolded, wives embracing husbands they had thought forever lost, children discovering fathers returned from the grave. Redemption Springs was living up to its name at last. In the weeks that followed, the town gradually rebuilt itself, not as it had been, but as something new and stronger. The freed miners regained their health and strength, joining the reconstruction efforts. Families were reunited, homes reclaimed, lives restarted. The railroad surveyors arrived as Downey had predicted, bringing news that officially confirmed what the banker had schemed for Redemption Springs would indeed become a major stop on the new line. The prosperity this promised would ensure the town's future for generations to come. But unlike Downey's vision, this future would benefit all of Redemption Springs, not just a privileged few. Clara and Rebecca established a town council to manage the anticipated growth, ensuring the community's needs would guide development rather than individual greed. 1 month after the battle, on a clear autumn evening, Sarah stood on the porch of the new cabin she and Jack had built by the river. Their old home, the one where she had spent 5 years in solitary grief, had been burned during the conflict with Blackwell's men. Neither of them had wanted to rebuild it, preferring instead to start fresh in a place untainted by painful memories. Jack joined her, his frame filling out again with proper nutrition and care, his spirit healing alongside his body. Eli's voice drifted from inside, reading aloud from a new book Rebecca had procured for the expanding school library. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Jack asked quietly, following her gaze toward the distant mountains. "Finding somewhere without so many reminders?" Sarah considered the question seriously. There had been a time when she might have said yes, when the weight of grief and isolation had made Redemption Springs feel like a prison. But now, "No," she answered honestly. "This is home now. Not just the place, but the people. What we built together, what we fought for." Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. "They're calling it the Women's Stand in Golden Creek. The story's spreading all up and down the territory." Sarah smiled slightly. "Ruby will be pleased. She always did have a flair for the dramatic." "It's a good story," Jack observed. "Maybe even an important one." "Maybe," Sarah agreed. "But I'm more interested in the story we're still writing, the one that continues tomorrow and the day after." As the sunset painted the newly rebuilt town in shades of gold and amber, a small figure appeared on the path leading to their cabin. Margaret Thompson, her stepladder, now her eyes clear of the fear that had haunted them after her captivity. She had begun training with Eleanor, learning the healer's arts with an enthusiasm that suggested a vocation rather than mere interest. Today she carried a basket of freshly gathered herbs, her blonde hair braided neatly down her back. "Eleanor sent these for Jack's cough," she explained, handing the basket to Sarah. "And she asked me to remind you about the council meeting tomorrow." Sarah accepted the basket with thanks, noting the confidence in Margaret's bearing that had replaced her former timidity. Another transformation, another healing, small but significant. As Margaret turned to leave, she hesitated. "Can I ask you something, Mrs. Blackwood?" "Of course." The girl's eyes were serious beyond her 16 years. "Were you afraid during the battle, I mean? When you came for me? When you faced Blackwell? Were you scared?" Sarah considered the question, carefully recognizing its importance to this young woman, standing at the threshold of her own strength. "Yes," she answered honestly. "I was terrified. For myself, for Jack, for Eli, for all of us." Margaret frowned slightly. "But you did it anyway. You fought even though you were afraid." "Fear isn't the enemy, Margaret," Sarah explained gently. "It's a natural response to danger. The key is not letting it make your decisions for you." The girl nodded slowly, absorbing this wisdom. "Like courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about what you do despite the fear." "Exactly," Sarah smiled. And you showed tremendous courage yourself. A flush of pride colored Margaret's cheeks. Thank you for saying that. And thank you for coming for me. For not giving up on me. We never would, Sarah assured her. That's what community means. No one gets left behind. As Margaret continued down the path toward town, Jack slipped his arm around Sarah's waist. You've become quite the philosopher, he teased gently. I've had time to think, Sarah replied, leaning into his embrace. 5 years of thinking, in fact. They watched the girl's retreating figure until she disappeared around a bend in the path. In the distance, Redemption Spring settled into evening routine, lamps being lit. Children called in for supper, the sound of a piano drifting from the reopened saloon, where Ruby had established new rules about respect and fair treatment. She'll be asking to learn how to shoot next, Jack predicted, nodding toward where Margaret had vanished. Eleanor's already teaching her, Sarah confirmed. Says the girl has a steady hand and a good eye. Jack chuckled. The world's changing, isn't it? Right here under our feet. For the better, I think, Sarah replied, though not without cost. They fell silent, remembering those who hadn't survived the battle. Sheriff Miller, 2 of the townswomen who had fought bravely, 3 of the miners whose bodies had been too weakened by captivity to recover. Their graves in the town cemetery were fresh marked with simple wooden crosses until proper stones could be arranged. Eli appeared in the doorway, book in hand. Sarah, Jack, Eleanor just rode up. Says there's something happening in town you'll want to see. They found Eleanor waiting on her mare, her silver hair glowing in the fading light. Town meeting, she explained briefly. Something you should witness. Curious, they followed her toward the town square, where a crowd had gathered near the newly rebuilt gallows, the same spot where Sheriff Miller had been executed. But the structure had been transformed, its grim purpose replaced by a platform draped with the town's flag. Clara stood upon it, addressing the assembled townspeople. Women returned, miners and children gathered together in the autumn twilight. We've voted to establish a proper town charter, she was saying as Sarah and Jack joined the crowd. One that recognizes the contributions and rights of all who call Redemption Springs home. Rebecca stood nearby, holding a document that Sarah assumed was the charter itself. Willow and Ruby flanked her, the 4 women who had fought alongside Sarah, now united in building what they had defended. Our first order of business, Clara continued, is to appoint a new sheriff to replace Miller, someone who has proven their courage, their judgment, and their commitment to justice for all. Her eyes found Sarah in the crowd. Sarah Blackwood has been nominated and approved by unanimous vote. If she accepts, she will be the first woman sheriff in the territory, perhaps in the entire West. A murmur ran through the gathering, not of dissent, but of approval. Sarah stood frozen in shock, feeling Jack's hand tighten supportively around hers. What do you say, Sarah? Clara called. Will you serve Redemption Springs as we rebuild? Sarah looked around at the faces turned toward her, expectant, respectful, trusting. These were her people now in a way they had never been during her years of isolated grief. Together they had faced the worst and prevailed. Together they would build something better from the ashes. She stepped forward, Jack's hand still clasped in hers. I will serve, she said simply, for as long as you need me. A cheer went up from the crowd as Rebecca presented her with Sheriff Miller's badge, polished to a shine and affixed to a new leather backing. Sarah pinned it to her shirt, feeling its weight, not as a burden, but as a responsibility freely chosen. As the gathering dispersed into impromptu celebration, a small girl approached Sarah, no more than 7 years old, her eyes wide with wonder. Miss Sarah, she asked hesitantly, weren't you scared fighting all those bad men? Sarah knelt to meet the child at eye level, recognizing the same question Margaret had asked, though, from a younger perspective. Yes, she answered honestly. I was afraid. Then how did you do it? The girl persisted, genuinely curious. How did you fight when you were scared? Sarah considered the child's earnest face, searching for the simplest truth she could offer. I was afraid, she said gently, but I didn't let fear make my decisions for me. The girl nodded solemnly, as if memorizing this wisdom for future reference. Like being brave doesn't mean not being scared, it means doing what's right anyway. Sarah smiled, touched by the child's insight. Exactly like that. As the girl ran off to join her friends, Jack helped Sarah to her feet, pride evident in his gaze. Sheriff Blackwood, he said, testing the title. It suits you. Sarah looked out over Redemption Springs, her home, her responsibility, her redemption. The town glowed in the last light of day, its wounds visible but healing its spirit unbroken. We did this, she said softly, all of us together, not just surviving, but building something worth fighting for. Jack's arm encircled her shoulders as Eli joined them, the family reunited against all odds. That's the true redemption, isn't it? He observed. Not just being saved, but becoming something stronger through the saving. Sarah nodded, words unnecessary between them after all they had endured and overcome. The badge on her chest caught the fading sunlight, a symbol not just of authority, but of the community's trust and her own journey from isolation to leadership. Redemption Springs had lived up to its name at last, and Sarah Blackwood had found her true strength not in the guns she carried, but in the heart that had refused to surrender to fear, to grief, or to those who underestimated the power of women who stood together. As twilight deepened into night, the stars emerged above the town, countless pinpoints of light, each small, but together illuminating the darkness. Much like the women of Redemption Springs, Sarah thought with quiet pride. Individually vulnerable perhaps, but together an unstoppable force for change.